Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our business surgery. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alan Stalker. I am going to have a very limited role as chairman today, but my colleagues are doing all of the speaking. So I'm glad that so many people have been able to join live on Zoom. I know that some other people, as with last week, are doing this on YouTube. So we'd said last week that we're going to talk about cash flow. Of course, we've now had the furlough scheme portal go live, so we're going to, and that is a big thing for cash flow. So we're going to hear from two of my colleagues who've been looking at that in some detail, and I'd like to throw that open to many others, including in particular poor Ross, who's presumably pulling his hair out and trying to deal with people's furlough scheme claims. How's your sleep patterns, Ross?
Not too bad. I think my business partner Lee she's actually doing the claims. I don't think she's had a lot of sleep on Monday, but I think the government portal seems to have stood up to it not too bad. I don't think it's collapsed yet.
You were saying last week that it was 450,000 an hour, and I think there were many times when it got over that.
Yeah, I don't think it's crashed yet.
Oh, excellent. Well, look, hear what Robin and Julie have got to say about that, and then we'd welcome in particularly yours, but obviously everyone else's views as well on furlough. Secondly, the other thing I thought would be useful to think about today was businesses are actually now getting business interruption loans, which I'm delighted about. So I just want to see what everyone's experience of that is. And then thirdly, various of my colleagues have got ideas on cash flow. But I'm going to try again to keep us just to an hour so that it's not taking up too much of everyone's day. So I'm going to start with our thoughts on furlough. And Robin and Julie were kind enough to produce another of their amazing video chats. So I'm going to share that with you.
Welcome everyone to this, which is the fourth in our series of weekly business surgeries during the present coronavirus emergency. This week's big highlight, of course, has been the launch of HMRC's online portal to allow employers to seek the payment of money for employees who have been furloughed. With me to chat through the scheme, and now that we know a little bit more detail about it, is Julie Sullivan, who's the head of our employment law team. Julie, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So to start off, can you just remind us, in general terms, what this furlough scheme does for employers?
Basically, it allows employers who've had to place their employees on temporary leave as a result of the coronavirus. It allows employers to do that, and at the same time, can we start again, Robin?
Okay, well, it's okay. We can edit this
that bit out. Okay. So the furlough scheme allows employers to place their employees on temporary leave, where their business has been negatively impacted by the coronavirus. And during the period of the temporary leave, employers are allowed to claim back 80% of their staff's wages from HMRC. It's then entirely up to an employer whether it chooses to, we call it the top up, but top up the 20% instead, and that way their employees will still receive 100% of the salary, but if they're topping up the 80%, that's to a cap of £2,500 per month for each employee, and the employers are also allowed to claim back employers' national insurance as well as pension contributions under the scheme. There's a lot of discussion about how long can my employees be on furlough for, and what the guidance has now confirmed is that there has to be a minimum furlough period of 21 days. So what I've been suggesting to employers is that they think very, very carefully, because what I've noticed is that when everybody heard about furlough, they all jumped in, oh, that sounds like a really great idea. but now a couple of weeks down the line, they're thinking, oh, we need to bring people back from furlough. And you do need to think about it, because it has to be for a minimum of 21 days. And during that period, your employees cannot do any work for you at all. So really do think carefully about the employees that you're placing on furlough before you do it. And once you have identified which employees you're going to furlough, you actually have to get their agreement to it. What you have to remember is that if the employees are only going to be receiving 80% of their actual salary, then that is effectively a change to their terms and conditions. So you have to get their agreement to that. So employers are putting in place what's called a furlough agreement, whereby the employee agrees to accept the terms of the furlough and that they will accept 80% of their salary. And the guidance that was coming out from HMRC from the start of this was very much, yeah, we just need their agreement. As long as they agree to it, that's fine. But at the last minute, HMRC and the Treasury kind of snuck in an extra wee add-on bit to the agreement, which is that as well as them agreeing to only receiving 80% of their salary, the employees also have to agree to not actually doing any work during that period. The actual term is that the employee will cease all work in relation to their employment. And that's caused a wee bit of a furore among employers, because obviously there are people who put in these furlough agreements a few weeks back when when the scheme was announced, and people quite happily got people to sign up to these furlough agreements. And there's a question mark over now, well, am I going to have to go back and get fresh agreements signed? Arguably, yes, but maybe if you're bearing in mind that a furlough period is only for 21 days, if you're getting them to sign up to a new furlough period, make sure that your new agreement's got in that they will cease to do work within that period. But realistically, maybe the lawyers in this Zoom call will have something to say about it, and whether or not there would be what's called judicial review of HMRC's guidance. But I think given the ethos and the spirit, and given what the guidance was brought in to effectively remedy, which would be that the country would be grinding to a halt, then I think it's unlikely that HMRC would not pay out when they said they would.
Okay, so how does an employer actually go about getting getting their hands on this cash, and more importantly, what do they need to have in order to make the application?
The portal was just launched today. It seems to be all over the news. I turned on the telly at 6 o'clock this morning and they were talking about it. So they have to go onto the portal, which is found on the government gateway. I tried to get onto the government gateway today to find out how the gateway actually works, but you actually have to be an employer to get that, because you get a user ID and password, and that ID and password are the same, as I understand it, they're the same details that employers would have got when they registered for PAYE online. And then once, sorry?
Is there anything else they're going to need to hand in order to make?
In terms of practical tips, once they've actually accessed the portal, obviously, as I say, they have to be registered for PAYE online. You'll have to have your bank account number and your sort code. Your struggled with these 4 letters all my professional life, PAYE. Scheme reference numbers. You'll have to have details of the number of employees that you're furloughing, their national insurance numbers, their payroll or their employee number, the start date and the end date of the furlough, the full amount that you're claiming for, including national insurance contributions and pension contributions for each employee, and most importantly, the really obvious details like your phone number and your contact number in case HMRC wants to get in touch with you to clarify anything.
Okay. Now you mentioned this issue about this last minute requirement of there being some sort of agreement in writing. Do you think it's going to be possible for somebody to go back and let's say somebody put employees on furlough from day one without actually having any of this recorded formally in writing? Do you think it's going to be possible to go back and remedy that now, given the change in given the change in the rules?
As I said, the whole ethos and the intention behind the guidance coming out, behind the coronavirus job retention scheme, was that people would still get something by way of salaries, and we would not be in the position where, come the end of lockdown, there would be a huge level of unemployment because people have had to have been made redundant. The only other option before the job retention scheme was introduced was redundancy. So what I would be suggesting to people is that if they haven't already got their agreements in place now in writing, which say that the employee agrees to cease working at this time, then I think they should be looking at getting those agreements in place now. I appreciate it's kind of after the horse has bolted, but I don't think it would do an employer any harm. Better to have belt and braces and have fulfilled the requirements and have those agreements in place now. Better to have that now than just to ignore it, because it might be the case that HMRC, I think they are likely to pay out for everybody because that was the ethos of the scheme. But at least now, if you have it going forward, you should hopefully be, if you don't get it for the last 21-day furlough period, you would definitely get it for the next period. I suppose it all depends on when you actually place your employees on furlough.
Okay. And do we know how long this HMRC are going to take to process payments?
As far as I understand, it's to be 6 days. I'm already aware of today. There's an awful lot of traffic flying about saying that there's lots of problems with the system, and it's not working just as smoothly as we thought it would. But the intention is that the payments will be by backs into the employer's bank account within 6 days of the application being made.
Okay. Now, another thing I've heard some doubts expressed about is what happens around accrued holiday and holiday pay.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have any clearer picture yet as to whether or not an employer is entitled to require an employee to take accrued holiday time, or what the situation with holiday pay is?
The simple answer is that the guidance is still silent on that. What I would say is clear is that employees, if they request to take annual leave during the furlough period, an employer is allowed to consent to that, and the employee would then get 100% of their salary, and obviously the employer would then be able to claim back the 80% of that. So that seems fairly straightforward, where it's a situation where the employee is making the request, and HMRC guidance was updated. The HMRC guidance for employees was updated on Friday of last week to confirm that. The situation with the employers, as I say, the guidance is entirely silent on that at the moment. are differing schools of thought on it. My own view is that Robin, I've lost that again, I'm sorry.
All right, we'll edit.
The ACAS guidance on dealing with the coronavirus scheme seems to suggest that you can force your employees to take annual leave. But that's kind of working on the basis of, well, you've been through furlough is no longer appropriate, and then you're on to the question of annual leave. And remember, as an employer, you can direct that your employees take annual leave on certain days. So traditional example is always Christmas Day, Boxing Day, 1st, 2nd of January. That's quite clear, that's quite straightforward. And you've got to give, as notice, double the length of the number of days holiday that you're requiring them to take. So say, for example, you're requiring them to take a week's holiday, you would have to give them 2 weeks notice of that. So I think in practical terms, you could be thinking of, right, well, okay, let's have them on furlough, and they can be in furlough for 3 weeks. And then we'll ask them to take annual leave at the end of that. So you could have them, say, take a week's annual leave, but remember you've got to give them 2 weeks notice of that. I think the practical difficulty with that and the human element of all of that is that your employees are not going to want to take holiday at the moment because there's nowhere they can go. And ACAS guidance suggests that you can sit down and have a good approach on employee relations and try and sort it out. But I think most employees will be aware of the fact that they can carry the holiday leave over for 2 years if they've not been able to take it due to a period of furlough. So I suspect that any useful discussions, any useful negotiations around when they're taking holiday is going to come at the end of the furlough period, when people are getting back to work and getting back to normal. And that's probably the time that you're going to get proper discussions about when people are taking their annual leave. Let's be honest, the whole point of you putting your staff on furlough is that you don't want to lose good staff, you want to retain them. So I would suggest that just to keep your employee relations, it is better to sit down and discuss it with them and see if they're prepared to agree to it. Hopefully we will have clearer guidance from HMRC fairly soon on this, because I did notice that on the guidance for employees, it said, for the exact words, or sorry, not the exact words, but the wording is kind of to the effect of, this is the position just now on holiday leave, but we will be updating and reviewing this. So I suspect that we will probably within the next week, fortnight, or at least by the end of the furlough period, I think that they're talking about allowing furlough up to the end of June it is now. I would suspect that within the next couple of weeks we will see something that confirms what the position is for employers directing employees to take annual leave during furlough. And that's maybe a question that we can have a discussion with some of the employers who are on the call, if they've actually been through the portal. If that's one of the questions that arises, if there's any indication in that and how annual leave's dealt with, they have to answer questions on it.
Okay, Julie, thanks very much for that. That's been, hopefully that'll be really helpful for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
So hopefully everyone could see that. If not, please don't tell me now, because it'd be very, very embarrassing. I'm mindful, Julie, Robin, that was Monday and it's Wednesday and things have changed.
Yeah, so I believe.
Anything you wish to update?
Yes, so the issue that we had about the furlough agreements and them needing to have the consent of the employee to say that they are ceasing to be employed for the period of furlough. Basically what HMRC are saying, we will still honour the payments under the scheme, even if your agreement doesn't have that specific wording. There is basis you might still want to go back and get an agreement from your employees not to do that. But what I would say, the word that I've heard to describe it is, let's not poke the bear. And I would suggest it would definitely be it would definitely be okay to do it if your employees are furloughed with 100%. Sorry, I just got a message up saying my internet connection is unstable. Can people still hear me okay?
You're a wee bit garbled, but got the gist of it. So
Is
we're
that
saying
normal?
that, so if I were to try and summarise that, we still do want furlough agreements. If we didn't have one before, not an utter disaster, but definitely get one now.
Yes, definitely get one now. Definitely.
Now, for people who were very, very keen in looking at our invitation to today, we have a free furlough agreement, which Julie was up all night drafting, she told me. On a more serious note, if you do want a furlough agreement, we've got one, happy to distribute to people who've attended today's surgery, so that's available. So that's us on the legal side. Let's hear the poor accountant speak. How bad has it been, Ross?
We prepared pretty well. We had last weekend, the weekend before, we'd already put a template together to do the calculations behind the detail. There's lots of detail, and I'll tell you the things that are hard to get through the computer system portal. So we then tested it. HMRC then changed the rules on national insurance limits. They've subsequently changed them back, which doing it yourself is going to give you a little issue. However, the issues that we've had, the two main ones are, and the first one's not affected us because we've done the calculations out with the calculator for the HMRC's got in the portal. But if you're topping up the salaries of the people in your work, so that you've put them on furlough but you're still paying them 100%, the HMRC calculator does not do that calculation for you. It just basically, as soon as you say it does that, it says, sorry, that is not in place. Now, I know actually the Young and Partners...
Kill me now, Ross.
The Young and Partners payroll person has managed to get her through, and she has done a grant claim, and my hat off to her, because Lee said that she didn't think anybody could do it on her own, but she has done it, and she was pennies out in the national insurance. I've been speaking to her.
Yeah, and she worked very hard at that, I have to say, and there were quite a few difficult calculations to be done, but she worked her way through it. So
yeah, the other
it wasn't straightforward. I think the payments moving forward are more straightforward. So if you've got a complete month, that's a lot easier. But where you've got a straddling of a month, so where you're looking at, if there were people who were furloughed in March, then that's a much more difficult calculation.
Yeah, the big one that's a big problem at the moment, where somebody, so we've got two clients, one of them paid off basically 20 of their people, P45 done, put the RTI claim in, which is payroll into HMRC. Therefore, they only had 53 employees at that point. They then took the people back on when the furlough came back in, which was what the furlough was about, to try and stop people getting P45. They've now put the furlough claim in for 62 employees, and HMRC's computer is basically saying you can't furlough more people than you had on your last RTI. So we are at the moment having that conversation direct with HMRC. What we've tried to do, I mean, this particular client actually needs their money to pay their next salary run. So in order for it to get their money by 30th of April, it has to be sorted today. So we have escalated it. We've spoke to a lot of payroll portals and different people that are doing it, and this is going on all over the UK. But HMRC are aware of it, and they are trying to deal with it. But that is probably the major issue we've had so far. The other thing, that if you're going to do it yourself, if you get it wrong, you can't go back and change it, and you can't put another claim in. We had a client on Monday who put one in for £1,800, then said to Lee, my business partner, I thought it was going to be higher. She checked that it should have been £5,000. As we sit here right now, they've probably lost £3,000 and we don't know how they're going to get it back, because they can't put another claim in and they can't add it on to their next claim because it will be wrong, because the period they'll be claiming for will be wrong. So there is a lot of that. The big thing we've just learned, to anybody who's got their own company, so I suppose the people that are complaining most about not getting any help are the sort of small companies where they're paying themselves a small salary and their dividends. If you've not put your RTI in for your annual salary by the 19th of March for 1920, you basically cannot claim anything under the furlough. So that's one that's catching people out. Luckily, we've done all our annual payrolls before that, so I think it looks like we're okay, but that is going to catch people out.
So that is the expert's view. How is everyone else faring with the furlough payment system? Who's happy? Who's sad? Who cares?
We found it. I mean, it was quite a difficult. Certainly was quite a difficult process to get through. I suppose you have to accept that, you know, it's been a system that's set up very quickly to try to meet a need, and so, you know, you can understand that there's going to be individual issues with it. Ross, that sounds like a difficult issue where people had already made redundancies not knowing about the furlough scheme and then tried to implement it. And of course, as you say, the furlough scheme was brought in and was designed specifically to catch that sort of situation. And it does backtrack it. I presume that was done on the basis that were the new furloughed people to be furloughed on the same day as the previously redundant people, or did they try and do it in stages?
So they made the people redundant, or basically, I mean, I think the guy panicked. He paid all the people off, gave them P45s, and then the furlough came back, and he said, "Oh, I can take them back." So he basically phoned them all and said, "Look, I can now furlough you."
Sure.
And that's what he did. But by that point, the way the payroll system's changed with RTI. In the old days, what you would have done was you just rolled back your payroll.
Yep.
You can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not helping that it's a year end.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's actually very interesting. It sounds as if everyone's having a reasonably positive experience, apart from the complexity of it with the furlough.
Can I just ask, not actually going through the process, so is it an application form? Is it a yes and no, or is it an actual form you have to complete? How does the actual completion of the application work?
So as you said, Julie, you've got to have a government gateway portal. You have to apply for the PAYE online. So even if you use a payroll bureau to do your claim, you've still got to get that online number. They were sending it out to the business addresses. I believe now they're emailing it. So I think you're getting it within 72 hours. But you still need that PAYE online number to claim it. And then it is a bit of a put the figure in here. And if you answer the question wrong, it throws you out. That's the other thing, that you've got to have all the information in front of you. You get 30 minutes and it times you out. So if you put 20 employees in, then go and try and find your PAYE reference number or UTR number and come back after half an hour, it'll have thrown you out and you've got to start again.
Ross, can I just come in on that question you had about the 62 staff? I would imagine that's probably sitting with a commercial bank. I don't know whether it's Royal Bank with us or whether it's somebody else, but I'm sure a conversation with their relationship manager to help them out with their payroll come back end of April might well be something to tee up sooner rather than later for them. So it might end up being a bit of a contingency, but at least if the ducks were lined up, the bank, whoever it is, whether it's us or somebody else, might be able to give them a wee bit of help over that period to get the payroll fixed and sorted.
The Royal Bank's already said no to him.
It was a lovely thought.
Is your internet gone down, Scott?
I think it's. I've just gone. I'm just going to take my foot out of my mouth.
It's gone out there.
Unfortunately,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, he actually, he's actually got, this guy's got quite a good business, but he made losses last year, and it was just a no straight away. It was definitely, somebody didn't read the proposal. It was just basically, sorry, I've got losses, can't support it. I can give you some good stories on the banks giving money as well. I mean, I had one yesterday for 400,000, which was a good one, and I've had one this morning told me that they've got 200,000. So the banks are definitely giving money out now.
Yeah, can I take my foot out of my mouth and come back on that point, if you don't mind, just in terms of a bit of redemption? I've got some stats just through to the back end of last week, and there was over 4,500 business loans that had been seen and were being processed by the bank, many of which, or nearly all of them, are being put to a stage where they can be put to drawdown. The lending, as you know, starts at the 5,000 mark, and we're also looking at the larger schemes now for those in the 45 million turnover category. So those businesses is a sort of shorter term. It doesn't run the 6-year term as Sybil's does, but the CLBILS one runs out to a 3-year window. And you know, there is quite a bit of approaches being made. The leisure sector, as you can perhaps appreciate, has been most heavily impacted. You know, pubs and restaurants and hotel businesses are the ones who've been approaching us at the bank for significantly longer sums of money, because they can see this taking till the back end of the year before any kind of normality might come back to them. So there's certainly a lot of approaches, there's a lot of requests, and there's a lot of facilities being sanctioned, and they're all starting to draw down now across a variety of sectors with us.
So if I could just come in on that, Scott, actually, I mean, just speaking about pubs and restaurants, I was picking up on some chat yesterday that pubs, etc., might not be allowed to open until the end of the year.
Yes, I mean, I think that's their scenario. What we're trying to determine with most businesses is a base scenario for their cash flow and a worst case scenario. You know, maybe said last week, hesitate to use a doomsday scenario, but if the income stream's dried up, what does the worst case scenario with the cash flow look like? And if you get somewhere between the two, and there's support would come. Ross makes a point just with regard to the one that I teed up myself nicely for. It is driven off a business's ability to be profitable in the year prior to, because we've got to assess it on a viability basis. Now, if it's a loss-making and it's not an explainable loss-making situation, that doesn't make it any easier. But certainly, you know, the pubs and the restaurants, they've got a lot of support there where it needed, and it seems to be, I think just about half of the approaches the bank's had in the last 2 weeks have come in from that particular sector.
Yeah, I mean, we likewise have seen, you know, we've just seen a very, very big interruption loan that's been approved. So, I mean, it does sound as if, you know, when on our very, I think, first or second surgery, so a month ago, the view was it's a lovely scheme, but no one's going to lend you any money. It does now seem as if, as you say, Scott, that money is being made available. I mean, without anyone breaching any confidence, has anyone else actually applied for a loan? Is anyone thinking about it? Has anyone had any success? Anyone going to, you know, shoot themselves immediately?
It's not necessarily the default position to start with the Sybil's loan, or perhaps, you know, there's conventional facilities there that are as flexible and as beneficial as even looking at the Sybil's loans. So, you know, those would not normally have been made to the banks, I don't think, but because of COVID-19, it's deemed to be the right kind of finance without engaging on Sybil's lending. I think the key from the bank's perspective is to see a set of forecasts that show usage of it or potential usage of it. Right. I think there's an element of potential hoarding that would be done where, well, we'll tell you what, we'll take £250,000, we'll sit with it on a deposit account for 12 months, and then when push comes to shove, if we've managed to manage things reasonably effectively, we'll just repay it without it covering as a cost. Yeah. But it's the spirit of the scheme that the banks are trying to adopt, as well as the kind of mechanics of the scheme. too. And it's if a sensible discussion's had, you can get around that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the one that I've seen most recently, there was a specific requirement to use the first portion to a particular purpose. I think even the second had to go to a particular purpose as well, just so it, as you say, you couldn't just bed and breakfast it and say that was delightful. You know, my 0.0001% interest, I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, you're off to the Caribbean with that if the flight's ever opened up again.
Ross, what about payments actually coming from HMRC? Is that all on track? Is there any kind of talk there, right, in terms of turnaround?
I think they were very bold in saying 6 days straight away, and I think if they didn't think they could do it in 6 days, I don't think they would have said it, because and they've backed it up by saying in print, if you're paying your wages on the 30th of April, you need to get that claim done by today, by the end of today. So I think that they are. I think they will deliver on that. I think going back, picking up on the legal document, they're saying that you've got to keep these forms for 5 years.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about, I think I think it's in the second surgery when we were talking about the furlough stuff, was, and you know, let us not be coy about this. Some people are using the furlough scheme in a more creative manner than the government intended. What is it you actually have to be promising the government? Because, you know, is there some sort of, you know, statutory declaration or something that the employer is having to make to say, I promise I'm using it right?
The declaration that you're making, and we were a bit, because we thought that what we would do is we would help the person complete this, send it out to them, then get it back and get them to declare that everything was okay. And we are trying to get around that a bit, but basically the declaration is that they're not working, that they were all employed by you on the furlough date, that type of thing. It's not that I'm going to keep them on. There's no. I'm having that conversation quite a lot with people. They're saying, okay, I furlough them. What happens at the end if I can't keep them on? I said, well, normal employment law takes over, and you basically either make them redundant or you take them back on in the contract that you had. So there is no promises making on this.
Yeah, I mean, Julie, as our employment law person, and given that you refused adamantly to chair today, I thought I'll just pick on you. Can you give someone notice during the furlough period? Because that's a question that a couple of people have asked me, and I just don't know what the answer is. You know, it's now been extended by another 4 weeks, is it, Ross?
Yeah. End of June.
So certainly someone asked me, I think it was yesterday or maybe this morning, is, okay, if I know it's going to end then and I know I can't keep them on, can I give them notice during the month of June and still be claiming under the furlough scheme?
I think it was very noticeable that there was a lot of, and I think it came from one of the ministers. There was something went out in the press that basically said, if you want to make somebody redundant, the process has to start 45 days before that.
That's right.
And I think that was very, I don't think that we're trying to put doom and gloom in it, but why bring that up and put it out there?
The Chancellor then very quickly made his extension to the furlough scheme of another month after that.
Yeah.
That came out about the, I think that was last Wednesday actually. That came out that they were saying, you know, if you were going to make somebody redundant and you were part of it, it was part of a collective redundancy process, it would have to have started within the next few days, as at last week, and very quickly he came out with the extension of a further month there.
Yeah. I mean, that's where they're, you know, for most businesses, you don't have this long period of collective consultation and the statutory period, because I read into that, and I'm waiting for Julie to tell me that I'm totally wrong. I read into that it meant that I could give notice. You know, if I know fine and well that at the end of June I've got no work for the person, I can give notice during the month of June and still be claiming right up to the last furlough date.
Well, I think if you think about what notice is, it's notice with regard to ending somebody's employment. So it still continues during that period of the notice period. So I would have thought, but Julie, I'm going to defer to you in that, but I would have thought that
what we're going to do, Julie, is we're going to give you the opportunity to go and find the answer out. And then we will email that out this afternoon to everyone.
But I suppose the reason is why is there employment terminating? So I think you're probably looking at giving them notice of redundancy at the end of the furlough period. In which case, I think normal redundancy rules would apply, in the sense that you would be paying them in lieu of notice and giving them the equivalent of a statutory redundancy pay. Because I've been advising quite a few clients at the moment the other way around, where the employer has just decided, look, there's no point in furlough. I know that at the end of the furlough period, there's just not going to be any work for them at all. So I'm making the employees redundant now and giving them notice of redundancy pay in lieu at this stage. But with my employee hat on, when I'm advising these guys, I'm kind of like, well, is there a genuine redundancy scenario here, and are employers just using it as an excuse to get rid of deadwood rather than?
But you can look at that two ways, can't you? On the one hand, if it's just free for the employer to give you 80% of your wages and let them continue for a bit, and on the assumption, they don't get into some right to claim unfair dismissal or something, you can just understand why an employer would put them on the furlough scheme and then deal with it later. Because frankly, who wants to take hard decisions now if you can put them off? But equally, if you know the folk aren't going to have a job, maybe you should be telling them now.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot in terms of how this is all evolving, and people's views on what is the situation is going to be when the furlough scheme ends is changing. Because you think that the hospitality sector, for instance, is going to be shut until the end of the year. Well, how are they going to deal with the employees? Are they going to continue the furlough scheme for the hospitality sector all the way through? And even if they do, how are they going to ensure that these businesses can pay all their other bills? Because it's not simply the rates and the employees' salaries that are the problem for these businesses longer term. So I think people are having to reassess. Perhaps they thought it was a short-term issue and furloughing was a great idea because it would all go back to normal. But I think a lot of people are now saying, well, what's normal going to be in the medium term? Normal is probably not going to be a return to what it was. It's probably going to be a period of time where things are going to be very flat. And if things are being very flat impacts your business, then you're going to start to readdress whether it's going to be reassess whether it's possible to keep all the employees on, or whether in fact you're going to have to make some redundant. I think that's going to be an ongoing process now.
I think it's very difficult for businesses at the moment to plan ahead, isn't it? Because we don't have any sort of an indication, and hopefully that will come soon, of what the exit strategy might be out of this, and whether it happens on an age basis, as has been talked about. I can't quite see how that works, or whether it happens on a sector basis, and certainly tourism, hospitality sectors, it looks like, just looking at other countries and what's happened there, that they probably unfortunately are going to be the last to get out of this lockdown period effectively. It's very difficult for businesses really to know what to do.
I think businesses are now getting the impression from what's being said that it's not going to be a simple case of the tap will be switched back on. You can run your restaurants and pubs again, and everybody can come out and use them once this 3 months is up, which was perhaps what people hoped when it all first kicked off.
I'm still hoping that, Stephen.
Yes, but I think people are now realising that actually there's some form of not lockdown, but suppression of contacts is going to continue for a considerable period of time. And the question is how that then impacts different types of businesses.
Yeah, and it may be, and hopefully the hospitality trade is going to get support for that longer period of time if they are the ones who
but it's all very well saying, well, we'll have a furlough scheme and we'll pay 80% of wages, but what it doesn't address is all the other costs. And there's going to be a lot of these businesses that can muddle through for 2 or 3 months, but if it's 6 months, they won't, because all the other costs will overwhelm them.
Yeah, I mean, I was seeing reports in the press yesterday, Stephen, that while pub landlords can't serve irritante notices on the sort of normal 2-week basis, what a lot of them seem to be doing is serving statutory demands for unpaid rent. So, you know, that's, if those are followed through, then you're going to see a lot of liquidations, compulsory liquidations.
I had a conversation with one of our clients who's got a restaurant in the centre of Edinburgh, quite a successful restaurant, and got a bit of money behind it. And it probably follows on from what Stephen's saying, that they were basically saying, well, we can take 2 or 3 months, and we can probably muddle through, pay the furlough, but if we've got to pay our people for 2 months, we're not open at all. And then basically it's like reopening the restaurant to a certain extent, because we've got no tourists. So we've then got to sell ourselves to the Edinburgh public or people from Scotland. Am I going to put more money in to keep this going, or do I just wind the company up, mothball it, and open again in October, November?
Mm-hmm.
And what they actually said was, and it's another point that somebody else was making, because they've got so many foreign staff and waiters have been with them since they started, it's not people just coming for the summer. They may just go home. So they don't know what staff they're going to have at the end of this. They want to have the same staff, but that might not be possible. So I think these are all the conversation, and basically the pubs have no chance. I mean, I think if the pubs are not open to December, it's got no chance.
There will be no pub sector left.
Yeah,
that's probably the reality.
I think your restaurant example is a really good example, though, because you know there's a business which has been trading well, and has got money behind it, and if other companies like that are facing the same questions, you know, you're not talking just about the businesses that were struggling anyway that are going to disappear. You know, potentially these businesses are going to have to shut down, and I think people are therefore going to be constantly reassessing whether they want to be keeping staff on anywhere close to when this furlough period will end. And period, you know, if the costs are just going to overwhelm them over a longer period of closure, then they'll just want to make the staff redundant and get rid of all the other costs at the same time. And if they're in a position to, like the example you're talking about, Ross, potentially just bin that company and look to do some new deal with their landlord start again with a much lower cost.
There's an argument for a business like that actually biting the bullet and saying, right, while we've still got money, let's do a solvent liquidation. Their
redundancy was £95,000.
Yeah, I think Ross, it's also a really good example of situations that we can really potentially help with, because looking at potential restructures for businesses in different circumstances due to what's happening now is a really good option to consider for people.
Yeah.
Suppose then the other, just with my employment hat on again then, if they didn't go down the insolvency route, so you had them employers making employees redundant, bearing in mind that an employee would have 3 months less a day to raise a claim for unfair dismissal if they were made redundant and challenged it, employers would then be in that awkward situation where you'd be waiting for that time limit to pass before you could potentially start running again, because you might have all these claims lurking in the background, because if an employee sees, oh yeah, you've made me redundant, but 2 months down the line you've started up again, that wasn't a genuine redundancy.
Yeah.
There's lots of issues arise out of it, Julie. You know.
Yeah, I mean that's one reason why, if the circumstances permitted, you might look at restructuring into a group and then starting that business afresh once there'd been a period of full closure.
Well, that was cheery.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but what's cheery about it is that there are potentially options for people.
And I think it is. You're absolutely right, Stephen, because we should not have a false cheeriness, because there are going to be tough times and tough decisions for people to make. And it's not just about, is the furlough scheme paying it? Because fine, the furlough scheme pays it, but I've got rent and rates and other things to pay. And it's just trying to plan for, okay, it might well take 6 months for a business from today to be back to where we think it should be. And being realistic and think, well, what are the steps that we need to take?
But I think it's about positively making decisions. Ross's example where the business is in quite good shape, if the business is starting to think that this could be a prolonged issue for it, and it could become quite serious over a period of months, now's a really good time to look at it and to look at the options, rather than in 5 months' time, once they get to the point where they really have to do something and the options become more limited.
Yeah, it's about taking the decisions.
Yeah.
Now, taking active decisions or conscious decisions rather than
even just discounting doing them, but at least understanding what the possibilities might be, as opposed to we just have to sit back and wait and see what happens to us.
Because when your cash is run out, your decisions are far more limited.
And I think that's one of the topics that I would like to pick up in perhaps either the next or the surgery after that. Is we're not really going to have time to talk about cash flow today, but I'd like to talk about cash flow. But also, imagine you're looking at a business and you can say, like your restaurant business, Ross, I've got 6 months of money left, and what should I do with that? Or I've got 3 months, or I've got 3 weeks, or I've got 3 days. What are the options for businesses then? Because there's a lot of people who've got very, very successful businesses who are just thinking, I could spend all of that 6 months worth of money, and where am I going to be in 6 months' time? And it's then being able to think about, well, as Ruth and Stephen are saying, if we take a deliberate decision now to tackle that, are we conceivably in a better or worse position? So no time for that today, I don't think, but I think that's something which I'd like to hear people's views on. We're all business people, and we all have sometimes difficult decisions to make. What ought we do, depending on how much cash is left? Because I hadn't thought, Ross, about the point you're making about, a restaurant that no doubt I will have been to many times. How I will know the waiting staff, and frankly, they might be quite keen to go home and see their granite, and might not come back.
Might not be able to come back.
No, exactly. But it's one of the unintended consequences of, well, the moment lockdown ceases, what does that actually mean for the pool of employees we have available to us?
You've got the implications of obviously Brexit at the end of January next year.
I've taken the view that I was really, really worried about forest fires 2 months ago. Brexit is now utterly unimportant in my mind.
Yeah, but not if all your staff go back and then they can't get back into the country again.
Yeah, exactly.
In more ways than one.
Although I am, like many of the people on today's call, a good Glaswegian, I really don't sound like it, and I'm just slightly.
No, you don't.
But I'm going to go and see my mammy and come back to the boardroom. They're like, I don't think so.
You're a fake news Glaswegian, Alan. Scott, I was going to say to you about cash flow. We don't have much time left, but just sort of on cash flow briefly. We've talked before, and you've kind of talked about a broad sort of brush or kind of a general rule of thumb of about 3 months working.
Yes.
Capital or working cash flow, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's certainly sort of a relevant indicator in the market. Young and Partners were in as the bank manager to that sector. That's a very reasonable rule of thumb. If you couldn't get your bills out for 3 months, could you sustain the business from cash reserves, and from a phrase that was used back in 2008 in terms of capital adequacy, and just having the resource there by way of cash, working capital reserves from overdrafts that are unutilized for most of the year. If you've got that capacity, then you're in a reasonably good position. cash reserves. I don't think anybody pre-COVID-19 thought anything more than 3 months was an effective use of money, unless it was being used for a specific sinking fund for something down the line. But 3 months worth of reserves is a not unreasonable sum. It's a big sum of money depending on the size of your operation, but it's a rule of thumb that's, if you've got it, you're in a better position than somebody who's scratching around the back of the sofa looking for cash.
But I always think the other side of that is you don't want to have too much. Mr. Locker and I seem to spend a lot of our time convincing people that they've been far too successful and they've built up far too much cash in their business, and it's time that they tucked it away somewhere else. And that, again, I think is a topic that we'll come back to in a future surgery. But there's a great danger that we've got a lot of wealth that's built up that we've just left in that company. And actually, yeah, you're right. I think, something, that's quite a healthy number, but we don't want to have too much.
No, and now is the time for businesses to be looking at the protection of that.
Yeah.
If they've got difficult decisions like Ross is talking about.
That restaurant, I mean, most of the money is personal money that they've got behind them, so they could put money in, no problem. But the restaurant, they've already told me that they've got guys, they're speaking, the chefs all speak to each other, and the restaurant owners, and he said, another successful restaurant in Edinburgh, he said he had 3 weeks' money. So they reckon they had 3 months, 4 months' money in the bank. But they said the other restaurant owner was basically saying, if they want the rent, I'm not going to be able to survive. Never mind 3 weeks' wages.
Oh, and I think that's right. I think the restaurant you're talking about is probably quite exceptional. And Scott's talking about certain types of businesses having, 3 months' money in case they don't get any money in. But there's an awful lot of SMEs that have nothing like that kind of cash in the bank. And of course, if you take the restaurant scenario, whoever thought that would possibly be necessary? Yeah. Business might go down, business might drop significantly, but not stop. And being well funded and having 3 months of costs, you would think that would be quite a high level of funding in a business for a restaurant, I would think.
Yeah.
I would say that would be a wholly exceptional restaurant.
Exactly.
That much.
And yet, where we are in the current circumstances, they could be sitting there in 3 months' time and the business falls over, notwithstanding the fact that they had it very well funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, even though they are in a very good position, I would think them and probably a lot of businesses in that sector, very good time to look at the circumstances to see whether there are different options that they could potentially pursue, as opposed to sitting and waiting and seeing what happens.
They've lost the summer trade. It was an Edinburgh restaurant, and with the tourism that goes through the city and the festivals and the tattoos and all of that, that's gone for what's now going to be 15 months. It's 15 months away before it lands, i.e. the summer of 2021. So it's a hell of a trip to go from here to the end of the year with nothing. And then, January and February are notoriously not brilliant months in the restaurant business either. So, the longer that goes on, the deeper the trough that they're finding themselves in. So it's a fair point, Stephen, that you're making.
And I think it also applies, to be honest, to some of these support loans as well. You have to question with some businesses why you would take on these support loans and continue to trade. For certain businesses it will be right, but I think it's a question that the business owners should ask themselves and make sure they're clear on at the outset. Is this actually the best thing to do? Because if you take a restaurant, for example, let's say they get a significant loan. So they've then got to spend how many years paying that back?
Yeah.
And maybe they were making a decent living, but nothing fantastic. So they're going to struggle for the next 5 or 6 years to pay that back, when maybe there could have been other options rather than taking the loan. I mean,
Agreed.
a lot of instances it's the way to go, but with some people, it's not. And I think it's just about people taking a step back and assessing the situation, deliberate choices.
I mean, there's no doubt that the decisions the bank's making now, they recognise not everyone that they support will come through the other end of this.
Yeah.
You know, they can offer the support and be seen to be doing the right thing right now to give them a chance. But if the bank's executives are sitting there, and they're not because they flagged this up, if we get everyone right and get everything that we put out the door back in, that will be something of a result, because they're not expecting that. There are certain write-offs that are going to happen by supporting businesses now, which were good businesses pre-COVID-19, were profit-making and operating in the right direction. But in 18 months' time, 2 years' time, when the debt servicing kicks in, that's when the pressure comes on if the revenue stream's not back, and they reckon they will lose some businesses as a consequence of that.
Well, we were looking at the papers for a large one yesterday, 5 million facility that's been offered. And when you read through the papers, you know, there's some seriously big assumptions being made.
All right. I says, Mr. Shaw replied yesterday.
Obviously, there are big assumptions that need to be made, but you know, if those assumptions don't prove to be correct or don't pan out that way, then you can see very easily that the businesses are not actually going to be able to come through it.
Yeah.
Let us end on a slightly happier note than that. I say it's almost the reverse of what some people were doing. I remember in 2008, 2009, is they'd cut their business right back to a point where, when things started picking up again, they still wouldn't be making any money. And it's being realistic about, is this the right thing for me to do, and it's going to get me to the right place, or what are the other ways that we could get to the place that we want to go to? Being realistic about what our what the business is and what it has. Well, I had promised my colleagues that we would do an hour. That's been a really, really interesting round table discussion from everyone. So thank you very much. Two things then, I suppose. Firstly, Julie's desperate to be sending out people these furlough agreements that she says she's written. But quite seriously, if you would like one, let me or Julie, or just email video.meetings@businesslaw.co.uk. I'm happy to send that out. Haven't decided what the topic for next week is. So again, if you've got any thoughts about that, feel free to ping me an email. But we'll be having another surgery at Wednesday next week. As I say, thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and be safe out there.